So welcome back. I hope that you stretched and had a protein smoothie or something during the break, because this next session is not for the faint of heart. If you're expecting a 101 easy session on unaccompanied homeless youth, you are in the wrong place. We are going to dig into some of the really tough questions, hopefully provide you not only with some answers, but I think more importantly, with some tools so that you'll be able to answer questions and scenarios that come up that might be different from the ones we're going to see today. So the first thing I want you to do is I would like to ask each of you to open up the chat, and you will see that during the break, I sent 3 little messages in the chat based on what the first letter of your last name is. I would like you to open up a link, because these are handouts that you're going to need to participate in our session here for the next hour or so. So if your last name begins with A through G, you've got one link. If you're H through M, you've got the second link. And if you're N through Z, there's a third link. I'm going to need you to reference those documents as we go through our game this morning, and you're going to have to be ready to type into the chat, and I'm going to have to be ready to look at the chat. So we're all going to be working hard over the next hour or so. So here's what we're going to do. I have created 3 different scenarios, and they're multi-part scenarios, and they are really digging into some of the very complicated issues that we see around unaccompanied youth who are experiencing homelessness. I know that we talked about this issue a lot yesterday in both the 101 and the 201. We talked about it in Karen's identification session as well. So now it's time for us to really wrestle with some of those hard problems. So not seeing anything in the chat. Okay, maybe that if you came in a little bit late, you can't see what was in the chat before. So I'm going to go ahead and repost each of those links. Oh, Annie Mitchell is reposting links for me, or Amy, sorry. Thank you for doing that. That's really nice of you. I do think the chat is invisible if you came in late, but I do want to make sure that you each get the exact right document here. So we'll make sure that you all have these links. So unaccompanied youth experiencing homelessness, as we talked about yesterday, those are youth who are living in a homeless situation. So any part of the definition under the McKinney-Vento Act, but they're on their own. They are not physically in the custody of a parent or guardian. They might be in the legal custody of a parent or guardian, but they're not in the physical custody of a parent or guardian. And so that raises a lot of issues around parental rights, because our entire legal system basically is structured around this. I would say, I wouldn't even use the word antiquated, because I don't think it was ever the case, where all children have legal parents who are caring for them appropriately and making sure that they have what they need. We know that we work with a lot of young people who are on their own. They may have had to leave home because of abuse, neglect, parental substance abuse. Parental mental illness, I think, is a big issue. That families might have just become separated because of what homelessness can do to families in terms of having to find shelter in different places, parents get incarcerated, lots and lots of reasons why we see unaccompanied homeless youth. And they pose a lot of legal challenges, I think, and just practical challenges because of that absence of a legal parent or legal guardian to do things like sign papers and make decisions and all that good stuff. So we are going to jump into these scenarios, and what I'm going to ask you to do, okay, before I even show you a scenario, what I'm going to ask you to do is not actually answer the question. What I'm going to ask you to do is look at the handout, the link that I gave you, and I've got them printed out in front of me as well. And I want you to find something in that handout that applies to the scenario. It might be the phone a friend topic. It might be a colleague who could actually help you deal with this if you are really facing it in your school or in your district. It might be something from the McKinney-Vento Act that provides you with kind of a legal hook to address the problem. It might be some other legal support from another agency, like something about FERPA or something from USDA, or maybe some attorneys that might be able to help support this student. Or it might be just other resources, other briefs, other documents from nonprofits or other agencies that are here to help us. So that's how we're going to kind of approach these scenarios. Rather than the answer, I think the real issue is, well, how would you approach this problem, and what can help you approach it if and when you actually face it in your district or in your school or in your agency? So let's get started and kind of see how this works out. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, when you have something on your sheet, when you find something that you think applies to the scenario, type it in the chat. You can either cut and paste the whole thing from your document and paste the whole answer, quote unquote, answer into the chat, or you can just say, A to G, number 2, A to G, number 7, and I'll be able to look at my handouts here and know what you're talking about. So that's kind of the game part of this, is you all are going to have to answer these. I'm not going to do this by myself. I'm going to need you to help me out with it. So here we go. First scenario, we have a 15-year-old student. She moved in with her boyfriend's family. She's sharing her boyfriend's room and is trying to enroll in her boyfriend's high school. Her parents say they want her to come home. They don't want her to stay at her boyfriend's or enroll in her boyfriend's school. And the student just says she can't return to that home. The principal of the boyfriend's school says, no way, she can't enroll there. She just needs to go home. So what do you have up your sleeve? Who has something? Again, I'm not looking for the answer. We'll talk about the answer too, but I'm more looking at what do you have on your sheet that you think could help you address the situation, something that you could bring to the principal, something that you could use with the parents even to figure out what are we going to do with this student. So take a second, flip through your handout there, and I will see what anybody can pop into the chat. What do you have up your sleeve? All right, they're coming in hot. The McKinney-Vento Act requires schools to give priority to the wishes of unaccompanied youth in regard to school selection and enrollment. Absolutely 100%. This is something that actually was added as part of the Every Student Succeeds Act a few years ago, back in 2015, to really clarify that when we're working with an unaccompanied homeless youth, even if parents and youth are having a difference of opinion about what school that child should go to, the schools, you actually have to give priority to the wishes of the unaccompanied youth. So we're assuming that we have identified the student as an unaccompanied homeless youth. I think absolutely we have. And so Christy, yes, 2 points for you. Amy Mitchell, the McKinney-Vento Act requires immediate enrollment. Absolutely. So even if maybe we don't really know exactly what's going on with the situation, we're a little bit confused, what's happening at home, what's happening with the boyfriend, we don't know, that's okay, but we have to enroll the student in school immediately. Let's get her connected to, a teacher, to a counselor, to somebody at school, and try to help support her and just try to help kind of start figuring out what's really going on here. Maybe we need to put some additional supports in place, but absolutely immediate enrollment in the first place. Alex is coming in with the priority to the unaccompanied youth again. Teresa, absolutely. Consult the definition of homeless and unaccompanied in the McKinney-Vento Act. Like I mentioned a second ago, the first thing we want to do is make sure, are we identifying the student as an unaccompanied homeless youth? So let's look at the definition. She's left her housing. She's sharing a room with someone else. She is sharing the housing of others due to economic hardship, loss of housing, or a similar reason. In this case, she says she can't return to that home. We just met her. We haven't really delved into the reasons why or what's going on. We know a lot of times students say something like that, and it might mean that there's severe abuse going on, or it might mean, again, parental substance abuse, or we've all worked with students who have all kinds of things going on at home, and they just know they can't be there. It's not a good place for them. It's not a safe place for them. So we don't know what's going on, but we're certainly going to identify the student as an unaccompanied homeless youth to get started. So these are all great. I see everybody shooting their answers in the chat. This is wonderful. We did talk yesterday about reporting. Under the McKinney, we're going to get to this a little bit later, but the McKinney-Vento Act does say we have to eliminate barriers to enrollment and retention in school for all of our McKinney-Vento students. I think somebody might not be muted, so if you're not muted, if you could just check that for yourself quickly, thanks. So we want to eliminate barriers, or we have to eliminate barriers to enrollment and retention in school. Thinking that CPS is going to swoop in and take her into custody might be a barrier for the student attending school. So we want to make sure that if you do have to make a report, that you do that in a way that you're interacting with the youth about it. I think Christine put in the chat something yesterday that, you can make a report, but also say, we don't actually have any indication of any abuse and neglect at this time. Maybe you will in the future, but right now, we don't know what's going on. So, helping to make sure that that is not a barrier to the student enrolling and staying in school is, not only important, but it's a requirement under the federal law. And yeah, Bailey, NCHE's determining eligibility brief is really great. If you're having some trouble maybe teasing out what kind of questions do I need to ask, is eligibility really, a thing in this particular situation, that's a great resource. So 100% so far, lots of people got points on that one. Let's keep going. Same scenario, but as you start to dig into this a little bit more, you get her in school, you talk to her, you connect her to a counselor, you find out that these parents were actually just the sponsors that she was placed with when she came into the US alone. last spring from Guatemala. Her sponsors are angry that she has left their home because they were getting public benefits for her, and they are afraid now that they're not going to be able to get these public benefits. And that's really where the whole, we want her home thing actually came from. And this is actually a real case that I was involved with. So the student at this point now is like, well, I think I want to transfer my SNAP benefits to the family that I'm living with. Maybe I can get on their SNAP case. And let's put on hold for now issues of immigrant eligibility for SNAP, because that's a whole other thing that we could talk about for an hour. But let's just say that this is a student who's saying, I'm not living in home A anymore. I'm living in home B now. I want to either get my own SNAP, or I want to get home B to be able to get SNAP for me. But somebody said you can't do that. She can't do that. So what do you have up your sleeve to help her? All right, we got a couple of phone friends. Absolutely. That one person at the SNAP office is always nice to the youth I send over. Isn't it true how having a person, an actual human at an agency who understands youth homelessness, who understands the role of the liaison and the work that you do with unaccompanied youth can make all the difference? Somebody told this student, no, you can't do that. Let's phone our friend and say, can she do that? Can you help us? Can you help us understand the procedure? The answer is yes, she can do that. And that person at the SNAP office would probably be the exact best person to kind of help you navigate that. There are, let me take a quick look here. For those of you whose last name begin with A and G, A through G, you got a couple of extras. There we go, bingo, Zoe, A through G number 8. The USDA has issued a brief clarifying what constitutes a household for unaccompanied youth. So I think there's a lot of misinformation out there about, well, youth cannot get SNAP on their own, or you have to be over 18, or you have to be living by yourself, or you have to be in CPS custody, or there's all kinds of, I think, myths about SNAP eligibility. Actually, to get SNAP on her own, this student just needs to show that she purchases and prepares food on her own. If she does that, that makes her her own household, and she could get SNAP benefits on her own. And it doesn't matter who her parents are or who they aren't or who she lives with or anything. Now, on the other hand, if she is eating with this family, with her boyfriend's family, if they all sort of have meals together, they're all purchasing and preparing food together like a family, then they are a household together. And then she could be added to the family SNAP case. So absolutely take a look at that brief on what constitutes a household. And that's going to be a very important resource for you. I'm going to put those of you who talked about immigration law services, that's a great one, but I'm going to put you on hold just for a second because I'm going to need you in a future scenario. But Maria Del Real, definitely, here's the other answer. USDA issued a brief clarifying what constitutes parental control for unaccompanied youth staying with other people. That is true also. Again, there's lots of myths around there about what does it mean to be under the control of someone that you're living with for SNAP. And USDA a few years ago was really helpful in saying, parental control means kind of exactly what it says. If the boyfriend's parents are saying, hey, you need to clean up your room, you need to help us take out the trash, we need you home by 10 o'clock, turn your music down. If they're sort of acting like parents for her, then she would be considered to be under parental control. And so she'd have to be part of their household for SNAP. On the other hand, a lot of the youth that we work with who are couch surfing, someone is letting them stay with them, but that's it. They come and go as they please. They're responsible for their own food. They're not considered to be part of that family. They're really on their own. There really is no one, quote unquote, controlling them. So again, that would mean that they could be their own household and they would get those benefits on their own. So excellent. Lots of points again for people on that one. And this is our last riff on this particular scenario. In this case, the student is actually looking for an attorney to help her with the SNAP issue because it's kind of becoming a big problem. Then the nice lady at the SNAP office apparently left her job and there's nobody there to help out anymore. So she's trying to get some extra help here. And she's also trying to get a U visa. For many of you who've worked with students who are immigrant students, particularly those who might have come to the US alone, they're frequently, unfortunately, victims of crime. And if they are a victim of crime, they can be eligible for something called a U visa if they help the police to sort of prosecute that crime. So she wants to get this visa, she needs a lawyer. And she actually found, is thinking about maybe finding some lawyers. But these attorneys have asked the McKinney-Vento liaison for school records talking about the student's attendance. And this is actually true. I'm working on a U visa case right now, and you have to show that the person has been physically present in the United States for a period of time. And school attendance is a great way to do that. If she was in school, she was clearly in the US. So this week, we frequently ask for school records. So this attorney is saying, hey, hi, I represent, scenario one, and I'm trying to help her get a visa, and I need her school records, and I also need a letter from you verifying that she's an unaccompanied homeless youth. Now, you're not sure, can you share this information with the attorney? Do you need a parent's permission? Who even would be a parent? Because those sponsors aren't parents. This is getting confusing. Whoa, Catherine, lightning speed, and Amanda, super lightning speed. The U.S. Department of Education has issued guidance, this is true, stating that schools can provide FERPA rights directly to a minor student. So FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, I'm sure you all know that typically that gives rights to parents to control who can access their children's education records. Once a student turns 18, they take that over. They make decisions about who accesses their records or not. But the Department of Ed also has recognized that we have many unaccompanied homeless youth who don't have parents who really have these rights or who are not exercising these rights. And so the Department of Ed has said that, if a school district feels that a student understands the consequences of the release of the information, that the student themselves can go ahead and consent to that release. So in this case, you could talk to the student and say, hey, this attorney, Patricia Julianelle, has asked for some information about you. First of all, do you know Patricia Julianelle? Is she actually your lawyer? Hopefully the youth would say yes, and it's not just some sneaky random person trying to get information. And then say, okay, well, do you consent for us to provide her with this information about your attendance and that you're an unaccompanied youth? And then the youth could say, sure, I consent for you to disclose that information to my attorney. And that's fine. That's just as if a parent had said that to you. And Christy, I see you asking, this is a great question. Can we just provide the info to the student and then they decide who they want to share it with? Absolutely. Again, the U.S. Department of Ed has said that for unaccompanied youth, and you can look at the guidance, the link is on the document, so you can access the guidance directly and see what it says. But sometimes it's easier and maybe a little bit more comfortable for the school to just give it to the youth directly. And then if the youth wants to share it with their attorney, that's on them. And you don't have to worry about, any potential, questions about why you've done that. Although, you do have the authority to do it. So that's cool. She might want to share information with her boyfriend's parents. Maybe she wants to, ask them to take a look at her attendance and provide her support, or who knows, who knows who she wants to access this information. So you can provide that directly to her. Good one. And for all of you people, bonus points to everyone who mentioned legal services for immigrant youth. Because oftentimes we see that in particularly young people, but also adults, from another country, they're often victims of scams, of people pretending to be lawyers and really taking advantage of them and just saying, oh, if you pay me $3,000, I'll get you a visa. If anybody ever says that, that's absolutely not true. It absolutely is a scam. So even if this attorney is sort of calling, it might be worth saying to scenario one, hey, just a quick question, who's this lawyer? Like, how'd you find them? Did they ask you to pay him any money? Because I can provide you with some information for some free legal services that actually might be able to help you, and just kind of help her make sure that this actually is a real lawyer and not someone who's trying to take advantage of her. We see that a lot, unfortunately. All right. So shake yourself out, stretch yourself. That was great. We're going to go into scenario 2. This one's going to be a little bit longer, and we're going to keep digging into these tough issues. All right, for our second scenario, we have a 17-year-old senior. Her parents kicked her out of the house when they found out that she is pregnant. So she's just been couch surfing with friends now. She doesn't really have any place she's staying particularly stably, but she's, she has that couch to sleep on here and there, but she has nowhere to go after the baby's born. So we're gonna stick around with scenario 2 for a while. Our first question about her is, with all of this drama with her family, and she's been moving around so much, she's missed a lot of school. She's missed 15 days already this semester. And now she's at risk of not earning any credits. And she's a senior. She's really on track to graduate, but if she doesn't earn any credits for the semester, she's going to be in big trouble. So what do you have up your sleeve to help her with this issue of all the school that she's missed and the potential credit issues? Well, again, super fast. Erin and Kendra both coming in hot with number 7. The McKinney-Vento Act requires state staff procedures to identify and remove barriers that prevent McKinney-Vento students from receiving appropriate credit for full or partial coursework completed. That is absolutely true. And this is particularly a McKinney-Vento right. So, it's one of those typical McKinney-Vento issues that it doesn't really matter what you do or don't do for other students. This is something that McKinney-Vento students have to have access to. So we're going to want to spend some time with her figuring out, first of all, how can we support her attendance so that she's coming? But second of all, how can we see what have you accomplished? What haven't, what have you satisfactorily completed? What haven't you completed? How can we get you partial credits for what you've done, and make sure that you are earning credits, for this entire semester? Phone a friend school nurse, that's unexpected but good. I mean, she probably maybe has some prenatal issues, some health issues. Maybe that's one of the things that is keeping her out of school. So let's connect her with the nurse and see, does she need any health support, that can maybe make it easier for her to attend? Maybe she's having nausea or other symptoms that are making it hard for her to come to school and attend. And if we can address those, that's going to make it easier for her to come to school. The dropout prevention specialist, definitely. And this is kind of getting us ahead to the next one. So I'm actually going to go ahead and advance the next slide. Maybe there's a teen parent program in the district. It's not her school of origin. She's not in that program now. It's outside the attendance area where she's been couch surfing, but it's a perfect program for her. Let's try to get her in. She's 17, she's a senior. We do not want to lose the student. We want her to graduate. We also know that if she doesn't graduate, that's going to put her at the greatest risk for continued homelessness, right? Do you remember that Voices of Youth Count data point from a few minutes ago? So we really want to get her that high school diploma. Absolutely. Let's talk to the district dropout prevention specialist and let's find out what services we can put in place to get her to school. We definitely need to do the partial credits for her, but we also, if we can get her to school, we don't need to worry about partial credits. So let's try to do that. All right, thank you, Maria and Brooke, for bouncing us directly into the next scenario. That was perfect timing. So let's keep going with her. She wants to enter a maternity housing program because she needs somewhere to live after the baby is born, but her parents have her ID and her birth certificate, which she needs to apply to the program, and they are not going to give them to her. They just don't want to have anything to do with her. So how is she going to be able to get her ID and her birth certificate and apply for this program? This one's tough. What do you have up your sleeve? All right, Amanda, absolutely. Phone a friend is going to be really key here. Can we find someone either within the school or out in the community who can sit down with these parents and say, hey, we know you're angry. We know that this is not sort of what your vision was for your daughter, but you don't want your grandchild to be sleeping in a car or be sleeping outside or not have any place to go. How about if we figure out a way to get this ID and birth certificate so she can apply to this housing program? And then, we're not trying to get involved in your parental rights. You obviously do what you need to do with your daughter, but think about trying to get her into a housing program. So absolutely. I think this is a tricky one for you all in Wisconsin because a number of states have laws that do allow unaccompanied youth under 18 to get these documents on their own without a parent's signature. But Wisconsin doesn't have any of those laws on the books. So you have to be more creative and figure out a way to see if we can get these from the parents. I will say that I got a question just the other day, a very similar situation, and the student basically kind of wanted to sneak into the house and take her documents and asked if the school resource officer would go with her because she was really afraid actually of what her parents might do if they found her or caught her. And I had to say, I'm not sure that's a great idea for the school resource officer because, if depending on how angry these parents are, they could sort of charge the school resource officer with aiding and abetting a theft or, a break and enter or a trespass. So, you've got to be a little bit careful about the lines that you draw here. If the student goes in and gets her documents, that's on the student. Like, we're not going to say anything about that. But there are some issues here when parents are really angry and really kind of potentially litigious, where we have to be extra careful. I'm just wondering, I'm sure that you all have run into this case, or many of you have run into this case of needing to get an ID or a birth certificate for a student under 18 whose parents weren't cooperating. What's up your sleeve? Do you all have tricks or things that you've used, things that you've done that have worked for you in particular that you want to share with your colleagues? Unmute yourself if you like, or pop it in the chat. I'd love to hear it.
We had a situation where like we ended up going to CPS and we're able to work with the youth. It wasn't obviously our first choice, but having some more involvement because the parent was kind of actively barring the student from accessing food, from accessing different things. So I don't know if that's something that is recommended.
Well, I think two things that you said that really kind of made me smile a little bit was, one, it wasn't your first choice, but you tried other things and you weren't really getting where you need to get. And the other is that you said you worked with the student. I think that, when you're talking with the student and you're working as a team and you're coming to agreements about, the best way to handle things, then you are absolutely doing what I said about eliminating barriers, right, to enrollment and retention in school. So I think that's always a good thing. Thank you for sharing that.
I've worked with family, relatives who had an unaccompanied homeless youth living with them, and one of the parents had passed away and the other parent was, no one knew where they had gone to and they were in a different state. And I mainly helped them figure out how to navigate the process. The student had been born in California, so I reached out to some California McKinney-Vento liaisons to figure, how do you get birth certificates for school? I contacted the office to get the forms, and then I just provided the family with like a whole packet because I didn't think they were going to be able to get all that researched on their own. It ended up that that particular state had a no cost charge for someone who wanted a birth certificate who was homeless. But a lot of times it's just finding, like, where are the forms, where's the process, where do they mail it to, and giving them an envelope with stamps on it. And I gave it to the family and was like, here's your packet. You can request a birth certificate. I just kind of broke down all those, like, how do you get from point A to point D to get it?
That is awesome, Christy. And that raises another really good issue. I mentioned that a lot of states have laws that allow unaccompanied homeless youth to get their own documents and fee waivers as well. And I'll put this in the link in a little bit, but we actually have a link on our website of all of the state laws, state by state. So yeah, you're going to have a lot of youth who weren't born in Wisconsin. They were born somewhere else, and those states might have laws that allow them to get these documents by themselves. So you can like hop on our website real quick, or what you did is brilliant. Call a liaison from that state, because they're probably going to have that nice lady at the birth certificate office, you know what I mean, who can just say, hey, yeah, here's how you do it. It's super easy. We'll help you.
Hey, I'll give a shout out to your Facebook group because that's how I figured out who in California had the information I needed. I posted it as a question and I had like 3 different California liaisons like reply to me and give me the information I needed.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah. I do like that Facebook group a lot. It's a great way to connect with peers from all over the country. Thanks for the plug. All right, let's keep going with the same student. So we got her into school. We got her into the teen parent program. She's going to the maternity group home because we got her IDs. Everything is going, as well as it possibly can. She's going to college, and she completed her FAFSA on her own, as we know she can do because she's an unaccompanied homeless youth. She does not need parental signature or parental income information. So she got that in. She got into college. She's super excited. But now her college says, well, we don't believe you. We need proof that you're homeless and unaccompanied. And that letter that you got from your McKinney-Vento liaison, we don't know that person. That's not enough. So what do you have up your sleeve to help her with her financial aid? Bam. Wow. Amy was the first person, but it was like split second between Amy, Alyssa, and another Amy. So yes, the Higher Education Act specifically gives McKinney-Vento liaisons the authority to verify homelessness. And unfortunately, this has been the law since 2008. This is not new. But we all know that there's staff turnover and people don't always get the training that they need. So we might need to print this out and email it to the financial aid administrator and just help do a little bit of education to let them know that yes, actually, our letter is proof enough. We do have the authority to do this. You don't need any more proof, and you should not be pestering the student in this way. Also, a couple of people, Bailey, Maria, a couple of other people saying, I've been having lunch 3 times a year with the financial aid administrator at the college in my town. For many of you, there's a particular community college or a particular 4-year university where most of your students will go. I know when I was in high school, we had basically Brevard Community College and usually UCF, University of Central Florida, and like 90% of my classmates went there. So, hang out with that financial aid administrator a little bit. A lot of your students are going to go there, so they're going to know who you are. They're not going to take a second look. They're not going to blink at your letter. And if you have a student going somewhere else, sometimes that peer-to-peer contact helps. So maybe your friend, the financial aid administrator, is willing to call over, well, I don't work at the University of Florida, I work at Florida State, but I know the University of Florida financial aid person. We work together all the time. I'll give her a call. I'll explain how this works to her. So that is also a fantastic phone a friend opportunity. And I see, let's see, looks like Laura popped in. The AVG. So the application and verification guide, if you haven't seen this, the financial aid community calls this the AVG. And that is like everything a financial aid administrator needs to know is in this book. It's, I don't remember how many pages long it is. It's very big. And the unaccompanied youth information is like on the second to last page, something like that. It's very, very, very at the end of this giant book of rules. So it's feasible that a financial aid administrator, particularly if they're new, they haven't gotten to that page yet. They haven't read this information yet. So you can actually send them the link, or you can send them the pages and say, hey, you probably, we're not aware of this, but here's the information about, who can make these verifications. You really do need to accept the verification from the McKinney-Vento liaison. But even if you don't like it, you don't need any other proof. Just talk to the student. Just ask them, and they can just give you the information just in a phone call, and that's all you need. You don't need letters from, a minister, or letters from the school, or letters from their employer. You can just talk to the youth and verify it that way. And that is in the AVG, and there's a link to that also on your in your toolbox. Great work, everybody. I think we have, that was the last one for that student. Okay, so this is our last scenario. Those of you who are in the McKinney-Vento 201 yesterday, it's kind of unfair because you actually got to hear from a young person answering this question. So you don't have anything on your sheets about this particularly, but I just thought this was an important conversation for us to have to start out with this scenario with a student who is an LGBTQ plus student going through some serious family conflicts and bullying since coming out. And I just wonder if anybody wants to pop something into the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and talk about this. If anybody was in the 201 yesterday and you want to share with the rest of your colleagues a couple things that Azeret said that really stuck in your mind, I'm just going to be quiet for a second and see if anybody has anything they want to contribute to these questions of helping to support an LGBTQ plus student. Well, I'll get us started. I'll break the ice. Another young person I presented with a lot who was not in the presentation yesterday, his name is Diego, and he's a sophomore in college now, and he's gay. And when he was in high school, he wasn't out. I'm not even sure that he necessarily identified as gay at that moment. But one of his teachers thought that he might be gay and was concerned about him and mentioned it to a counselor. And said, hey, I think the student might be gay. I don't know if you want to sit down with him and give him the opportunity to have a conversation with you or something like that. And the counselor did not talk to Diego. The counselor instead called Diego's brother. Diego was staying with his brother after he had to leave his house, his parents' house. His brother was not very cool with the idea that Diego might be gay. And when the counselor called him and started talking about Diego's sexual orientation, it became a big problem, and Diego lost his housing again for a little while because his brother kicked him out. So that's a good thing not to do and not to say. Don't just call the student's family and talk to them about it without talking to the student first, because you don't know what the vibe is in that family or what the situation is. He even, in this particular scenario, the student even says that he was going through some family conflicts. That was not the case for Diego. He didn't say that. But Diego was so horrified by that. And he just says, why didn't somebody just talk to me? I was right there. Somebody could have just come up and talked to me and we could have had a conversation. And calling my brother was really kind of the worst possible thing they could have done in that moment. So I see a question here. Are they at risk of becoming homeless? Can you gather more information from your conversation with them? Good question. I know one of the things that Azeret really talked a lot about yesterday, and I think Juan too also, was really trying to develop an actual real relationship with the student, maybe before digging into all these questions. A student might really just be very comfortable and just want to talk to you about, hey, I'm gay and here's what's happening at home. And that's fine. They might be very open and they might have a lot to say and a lot of questions for you. Or they might not want to talk about it at all. This student has disclosed to you that he identifies as LGBTQ+, so at least the student has opened the conversation. And so I think that then invites you to say, okay, so, do you want to talk about what's going on with your family? Are you worried that you might lose your housing? Are there resources that you're looking for? Do you want me to send you some links of some organizations in town that I think might be able to help you? If you noticed, I'm trying to phrase all my questions in a way that puts the control in the hands of the youth. Do you want me to do this? Is this something you're looking for? Rather than saying, oh, I'm going to refer you to this organization I know. Kind of take it down a notch and just sort of really try to put the young person in the driver's seat of, what do you want me to do for you? What do you need me to do for you? I'm here to do it, but I want you to be the one in charge of really driving me and not the other way around. That's something that youth always say, at least to me. Christine saying, yeah, it stood out to me when Azeret said that it's not the student's responsibility to educate us on the topic. We need to do that on our own. So that's great. The student might say to you, I identify as non-binary and I'd like you to use a they pronoun. That's cool. You might not exactly understand what that means. You can just say, okay, I'm going to make every effort to use they. I might make a mistake every now and then, and I hope that you'll help me to do better, but I'm going to really work on using they. And then later on in the day, you might get on your computer and you might Google non-binary, and you might Google pronouns, and you might do some education of yourself. It's 2022. We can find all this on Google. We don't need the student to sort of make it their burden to kind of educate us. Alex says, it sounds like you may be experiencing two really heavy things. Which one is weighing on you most? Explore that and help problem solve together. I love that. I love that you're really putting the student in charge. What's weighing on you most? What do you want to talk about? Let's talk about that. And kind of, again, really leaving them in the driver's seat. That's so important. People talking about a Gay Straight Alliance group and helping maybe to connect. Again, you could ask, did you know that we have this GSA at our school? Is that something that you'd like to be connected with? And again, they can make that decision on their own. Do you want, is there a trusted adult that I could connect you to? Do you have someone? Are you interested in having someone? Would you like me to suggest some people to you? Definitely kind of doing that. If they've come up to you to tell you this, then like it or not, you are their trusted adult, at least at this moment. So that's, you're who they're going to right now. So you kind of, Azeret really also talked about your own personal boundaries. You can decide how comfortable you are having these conversations with the student. And if you're not, that's okay. You don't have to do things that you're not comfortable with. You can just explain that to the student, that this is, that you don't feel like maybe you're the best person to talk about this with them. You really care about them. You really want to help them, and you really value and appreciate that they've trusted you with this information. But there might be somebody better that you could connect them with. How do they feel about that? Or, again, saying it better. Would you like to talk more about it, and how can I help? I'm here to listen. These are all really, really great suggestions, everybody. And leaning on resources. Yeah, so Kendra's saying restorative practices have also had positive impact. So again, if you don't feel totally prepared to have this conversation, but you'd like to, you feel like, yeah, I really want to do this. I can do this to help the student, but I'm not exactly sure I exactly have the tools I need right now. That's another thing that you can educate yourself more on. You can go to PFLAG, you can go to different advocacy organizations that are online. You can talk to somebody yourself. I'll tell a personal story. When I was thinking about coming out to my parents, 40 years ago, I went to a PFAG meeting and I said, hey, parents, how would you have wanted your kids to come out to you? Like, help me out, and they were able to give me their input, and I was able to really see it from their perspective. So, you could educate yourself in different ways to equip you, to be a better support to the student. Again, if that's something you want to do. I really appreciated what Azeret had to say yesterday about, like, it's okay if this is a boundary for you and you don't feel comfortable doing this. That's fine. You can be appropriate and kind and caring and help that student find someone else. Awesome, you guys. Thank you so much for digging into that with me. I would have had Azarette here to do that with us today, but she did it yesterday, and I tried to give her a break, give them a break. See, look, I did it again. Azarette uses they, them pronouns, so I try to give them a break and not put them on the spot too much. So let's dig in a little bit more with this same student. So the student, so you've had some conversations now, you guys have a relationship. The student now has told you, hey, you know what? I came out to my parents, they kicked me out. I'm staying with a friend's family temporarily just outside the school district boundary. His parents, again, are very angry. They told the school of origin they don't want him participating in any activities. Again, these are all real scenarios of students that I've worked with. So they sort of think that if they kind of take away some of his favorite things, that they might change him in some way. So his parents don't want him to participate in any activities, and the State Activity Association also says he can't play because he's living outside the school district now. So he's devastated because he's starring in the school play, he's on the baseball team, he really wants to continue in these activities. What do you have up your sleeve to help him? Phone a friend. I've talked with that guy at the State Activity Association before. He can help me out. Exactly. And yesterday, I can't remember if that was in the 201 or if it was in another session, but I know that DPI also shared some great information that they have from the Wisconsin Interscholastic Activities Association. They're aware of McKinney-Vento. They kind of get it. So hopefully, again, you might have somebody at the association who just is new and they don't really understand how McKinney-Vento works and they're saying, no, you can't play. But if you've talked with that guy at the State Athletic Association, you can get him involved and he's going to be able to immediately say, oh yeah, this is McKinney-Vento. It doesn't matter where he lives. He can participate fully. We've got, let's see, Consult Schoolhouse Connections full participation in extracurricular activities brief. Absolutely. You know, if you need a little bit of legal backup to help you with this, that brief has everything written out. It's got all the legal citations. It's a good thing that you can just hand to someone and say, hey, take a look at this. This student really does have the right to play varsity baseball at his school of origin, even though he's living outside the district. Catherine's coming in with the actual legal citation to the McKinney-Vento Act. States must have procedures to ensure that McKinney-Vento students who meet the relevant eligibility criteria, like, for example, he actually has to know how to play baseball if he wants to be on the baseball team. But otherwise, we have to eliminate his barriers to participation. So just where he happens to be staying cannot prevent him from playing. And Christy, absolutely. Every case that I'm aware of, and you know, there's definitely, it's a big country. I'm sure there are cases that I'm not aware of, but I'm aware of a lot of them. And in every case that I'm aware of where an attorney has actually represented a student on one of these McKinney-Vento participation classes, the students have always won because it's pretty clear, you know, if it's a McKinney-Vento student, they have to be allowed to participate. It doesn't matter where they've lived or how long they've lived there. You know, as long as they meet the requisite requirements around their skill level, et cetera, they need to be allowed. And we do have the actual legal briefs from a bunch of these cases that we've redacted to take out student names, and we can send those to you. I send them to other attorneys a lot of times when a lawyer calls me and say, hey, I'm representing a student in Wisconsin. Do you have any briefs I can use? And I'll just send them to them. So we've got all that. Great. Again, 100%. You got all the answers on that one. You all are really good at unaccompanied youth. You're going much faster than I thought you would on this. Okay, so now we're all clear. We know he can do the play. We know he can do baseball. We know he can stay in a school of origin. Everything's good, except he needs a sports physical. And his parents definitely are not going to sign for that. So how are we going to be able to get him a physical without parental consent? What do you have up your sleeve? This is another case where you kind of have a little bit less up your sleeve in Wisconsin than you might in other states, but hopefully you have something up your sleeve. Someone was talking about this yesterday. I can't remember who actually suggested a particular place that they had brought students to. I remember seeing that in the chat yesterday. I'll give you a minute to look at your handouts. Okay, the family mediation program, that might be a resource again. You know, maybe it's really hard to know, but it's certainly worth looking into to see if there's an opportunity to sit down with the student and the parents, have a conversation about the situation. and try to see if there's a place where they can meet in the middle, where his parents would be willing to help him to get a physical. You know, one thing that a mediator might say to the parents is, you know, under federal law, he's going to play baseball. Like the school has to allow him to play under the McKinney-Vento Act, you know, kind of regardless of what you think about it. But you might want to keep him safe by helping him to get that physical before he plays. You know, I don't know how a mediator might address this, but it's worth a try, right? The school nurse, a couple of people are saying, hey, let's talk to the school nurse. Absolutely. The school nurse might be aware of a provider who would do this. The school nurse, him or herself, might be able to do it. The trick here is, like I said, in about, I lost count, I think we're up to about 35 states, youth under 18 who are on their own, who, you know, meet the definition of unaccompanied youth, they actually can consent for their own basic medical care. And we also have a document on our website about that. If you want to take a look at it, you can see all the states and what other laws say. So you can see that in a number of states, they can consent on their own. In Wisconsin, you don't have a law like that. Now, depending on where you're located, this is a bit of an extreme solution, but depending on where in Wisconsin you're located, he can consent for his own healthcare in Illinois. You know, he can consent for his own healthcare in some other neighboring states that you all have. I'm not great at geography, but so, you know, depending on where you live, he can drive for half an hour or an hour and see somebody and get the medical care he needs. But I like this other suggestion here. I had a student go to the community health center with a letter stating he was an unaccompanied homeless youth. Janelle, I don't want to put you on the spot, so feel free to just ignore me. But if you want to unmute yourself and tell us a little bit about your experience with that, what health center did he go to? How did they treat him? Did it work? I think everyone would love to hear more.
Yeah, he wanted to play sports, and the high school he was attending, one of his teachers, he was real involved with, called me, and I said, hey, it's worth a try. I gave him a letter, and the teacher took him there. The doctor actually did call, and I explained the situation, and they gave him the physical so he could provide for sports. They didn't charge him either.
That is fantastic. So that kind of goes into the phone a friend list now. So now you know where to send youth. And where are you from, Janelle? What's your school district? Oh, Kenosha. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're anywhere near Kenosha and this comes up for you, find Janelle and ask her who she sent the student to. Because this, I mean, I'm laughing, but it's a real thing. Like when you find a provider who will do this, because a lot of providers will, if it's something like a physical, you know, if it starts to get a little bit sketchier and it's more in-depth medical treatment, they might say, whoa, I really don't want to do this without a parent. But if you're talking about a basic physical, I think you probably can find providers. You know, Christy says maybe if he has an established GP, or a pediatrician or someone he's been seeing, you know, they might go ahead and do the physical because they know him, they know the family. A health clinic might be able to do that. So you kind of have to get really creative with this because you don't really have a statutory legal way to do this. So it's really kind of about who can you find as close as possible to do this for the student. Now, there's also the McKinney-Vento Act requirement, right, that unaccompanied youth and any McKinney-Vento student has the right to immediate enrollment, which includes attending classes and participating fully in school activities. That's the definition of enrollment. So he needs to be allowed to participate in that activity. And so many schools will just waive the physical. You know, if we don't know how old he is, maybe he's played baseball in the past, he's had a physical in the past, he hasn't had any issues with his physical. You know, he's not exhibiting any kind of health problems that we can observe. You know, go ahead and let him play without the physical. Now, on the contrary, I would say if we know that he has some serious medical issues and it could potentially be dangerous for him, you know, to be out running down a fly ball in 80-degree weather, then you need to be more careful about, you know, being reasonable and being prudent and exercising reasonable care for him. But for the most part, you know, I think it's fine to just go ahead and let him play without the physical. Yeah, his prior school may have a physical on file. He may have had one earlier this year over the summer. He may have had one last year. Kendra is asking that there are some school districts that have a district clinic that may be open to staff and family members who go through district insurance. And I don't know if anyone else has a clinic like that, and is it open to any of your students or families? So if anybody has something to add about that for Kendra, feel free to unmute or pop that in the chat. All right, so I hope that exercise was helpful to you. Again, the idea here is to know what the resources are, whether it's organizations, laws, phone a friend. You all can access all of these. So regardless of what your last name is, they're all on DPI's conference website. You can access all of them. You can have those as resources as you face additional questions or challenges about unaccompanied homeless youth. But you were so brilliant and so great with the game that we finished a little bit early. I would like to open it up to just any questions you have. If there are particular scenarios you have dealt with or are dealing with that have been problematic for you, or any issues or questions that you want to raise, I am happy to try to answer all of them. So I'll be quiet for a little while, type into the chat or unmute yourself.
I will say there were a lot of questions that were coming up yesterday that really ended up being about unaccompanied homeless youth. So if you remember, if we didn't get to it, I remember in the 201 session saying we're going to get into that tomorrow. So I know you have them.
When I pulled up, it just so happens that I did remember to put the link to the Facebook group on this slide that Christy was talking about earlier. So I pulled that up here. If you use Facebook, you can go on to that link and join the group. It's pretty much unmoderated. I'll be honest with you, our staff doesn't really have the capacity to spend a lot of time on that page. We pop in from time to time. It's really mostly just a way for you to connect with peers around the country. You can ask questions, share forms, all that good stuff.
I did have a question that has to do with kids who are under the age of 18 and their parents report them as a runaway. I know that you had mentioned that it's not actually our responsibility to kind of verify the reason why kids are living away from parents, but I had always thought that we were supposed to double check that first, like just to make sure they're not reported as a runaway, because technically I thought they were supposed to go back home if their parents had reported them, but is that not a piece that we necessarily have to worry about?
Yeah, I think you don't necessarily have to worry about it. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. So first of all, I would say, because I've heard about this a lot, like sometimes somebody comes in to enroll a student and they're not a parent, and McKinney-Vento immediate enrollment, 100%. We always do immediate enrollment. But sometimes somebody comes in and you just get a vibe, your registrars and secretaries are really smart and sensitive, the teachers, the counselors, whoever, they get a vibe that something's creepy. So when you get a vibe that something's creepy, like obviously you need to do what you need to do to protect that student. But as a general rule, I always go back to the piece of the law that I mentioned earlier, which is that at both the state and local level, there is a requirement to remove barriers to enrollment and retention in school for students experiencing homelessness. And so, for example, and word spreads. So if an unaccompanied youth thinks, well, they're going to call the police on me, well, they're probably not going to come to school, right? They're intelligent individuals. They're not going to come to school if they think you're going to call the police, if they think they're going to be brought back home to a home that, for whatever reason they believe is inappropriate for them. I've definitely worked with students who have come to school, they've been at school, school has called the police, student sees police from, across the yard, and they take off and the student just disappears and never comes back to school again. So I think, there is this case by case where if you need to make a report to CPS, if you get a vibe that like this Uncle John is not Uncle John, and I am super creeped out by the way he interacts with this child, you obviously want to make sure that you're protecting the child. But yeah, as a matter of course, to do that, it's really up to the law enforcement at that point. If a parent reports their child as a runaway, at that point, it's up to law enforcement to do their job, to find them, to bring them back. It's really not up to the school to do that. You can't conceal a child from their parent. Absolutely. If the parent comes in and says, or the police come in and say, is this child here? Don't say, no, we've never heard of them. But you don't have to do that kind of assertive, proactive outreach.
Well, and I've had it come up for students who aren't new to enrolling in the district. It's more they're already in our district. And am I qualifying them McKinney-Vento? Like, I thought that was somehow a piece of what we had to figure out is, are they an unaccompanied homeless youth, and are they reported as a runaway, and do they need to go back home, which would then, if they're back at home with parents, then they wouldn't fall under McKinney-Vento. I just, for some reason, thought that that was part of it. So it's helpful clarity to have that we don't need to necessarily do that extra step. It's not about the why, it's just about the facts of the situation. At the present moment, they're living away from parents, regardless of whether or not their parent has called them in as a runaway.
Exactly.
That we don't notify them.
Exactly. That's what I was just going to say. Whether they've been called in as a runaway or not is really totally irrelevant to your decision about whether they're an unaccompanied homeless youth. It might be very relevant to things that happen later, but it's not relevant to whether you would qualify them or not. Because we know it goes both ways. There are lots of unaccompanied youth who haven't been reported runaways, and there are lots who have for reasons that are really have nothing to do with their parents actually wanting them home, but a lot of times have to do with issues of public benefits and other things like that. I did see a question in the chat, and I'm actually going to stop my screen share for a second because I want to find this resource for you, Janelle. I'm going to look it up online right now. The question of who can sign an IEP for an unaccompanied youth is really complicated, but there is a document that is going to explain it all to you, and I'm going to pop that link in the chat right now. This is something that I put together many years ago with the National Association of State Directors of Special Education, and I think it tries to simplify this as much as possible. So I just put that link in there. The short answer is McKinney-Vento gives rights to unaccompanied youth to essentially act as their own parent, but IDEA does not. The Individual with Disabilities Education Act does not. IDEA continues to require a parent, but there's a pretty big definition of what a parent could be. It could be a parent the way we consider, we typically use the word in English, but it also could be an individual acting in the place of a parent in the absence of a parent or guardian. So in our scenarios, the parents were always kind of around, but many of the unaccompanied youth you work with, like the example that Christy was saying before about the ID where mom was deceased and they couldn't even find where dad was, the student might be staying with somebody else who's essentially acting as a parent, and that person would actually meet the definition of parent under IDEA, and so they could sign. If there isn't anybody who meets that definition, Kendra's saying grandparents, aunts, uncles, older siblings who the child's staying with, they definitely could meet that definition of an individual acting in the place of a parent or guardian in the absence of a parent or guardian. Otherwise, your school district has a process that would appoint someone called a surrogate parent who could sign for them. So that link will kind of break all of this down for you and give you all that information in a way that hopefully is understandable.
And our DPI special education team does have like a surrogate parent form and all of that information there too. So if you do have to go that route, there are forms through DPI that are accessible, and your special education director in your district should be aware of all of those resources too.
That's great to hear, Christine.
I'm gonna jump in and answer the one about reporting, because this came up in our, I think the 201 session yesterday, and some people mentioned it again this morning too, about needing to report unaccompanied homeless youth. So Wisconsin does have a state statute that says you're all mandatory reporters if you find out a youth is under 18 and living on their own. So, so yes, you do. Patricia kind of said this a little bit earlier, but yes, you do need to report. And what we encourage you to do from DPI is to reach out if you think that it would cause an unsafe situation for the youth to be reporting that. If it's really contentious with parents, you think parents are going to find out, then don't do that, because that really would create a barrier for the youth. But if you are reporting, unless you have really big concerns about abuse or neglect, you can share that you don't have those concerns. You can make the report and say, I have no concerns about abuse or neglect. We know where the student is. We're in contact with the caregiver, etc. They're not going to follow up. I mean, to be honest, the counties don't have the time either to be following up just because there's a youth living with an aunt. It's just not in their time, worth their time to follow up if there's not concerns about the student. So you can state that, and I've heard from homeless liaisons across the state for years that that's what they do, and they just share there's no concerns. So that's what I encourage you to do as well. If you do, of course, if you have concerns, definitely share that. That's important. That's the point of reporting, but just know that it's okay to say we don't have concerns when you make that report.
Thanks, Christine. I really like that nuance. I think that's really important. That's what makes it all work.